Okay, let's hi, welcome. My name's Dunstan. And this is talk about Zen of Postgres. The motivation for this was really a comment that Josh Drake made to me at the Portland conference, where he said that a number of people found it difficult to get into the process of contributing code to Postgres for a variety of reasons, and that people found it intimidating and sometimes difficult. And so, really, this talk is intended to perhaps give you a few tips about how to negotiate that if that's what you're interested in doing, and to set what I think are the right sort of particularly cultural framework for participating in the Postgres community. And I'll also be talking about some of the technical aspects, but really it's more about the main focus is intended to be on the cultural aspect. Who am I, in case you don't know? I've been a contributor for several years. I'm a core committer. I created the Postgres build farm. I'm an admin on PG Foundry, and I run a consulting company that does pretty much all Postgres work. And that's our little logo at the bottom. And some of the things I've done, you might be familiar with: dollar quoting, CSV, import, and various other bits and pieces. All right, we just talked about the two aspects of being a good hacker. So, here are some things about the Postgres community. We talked about this a bit in this morning's session. The Postgres community really is, I believe, open. It's not just that the source is open, but the community is open. And people often might find it difficult to get into, but people are treated pretty much on merit. But what people find difficult is that comments can be, shall we say, forthright. And that can certainly be off-putting. I don't think there's anybody in the community who hasn't, from time to time, got annoyed or angry or disappointed by things that happen. If you put forward a proposal and somebody might come in and say, well, this is going to, this is completely unworkable, or it's a horrid piece of code, or something like that. That can be fairly discouraging. And it really stems, though, from our commitment to quality. One of the things that strikes you, if you look at the Postgres code, as opposed to practically any other open source project that you like to think of out there, in my experience, is that the quality of the code is very high. It's quite impressive. And if you go and you look at the works of people like Jan, Tom Lane, and they are just very, very good coders, and it's a delight to work with. But that means that they are going to be pretty tough when it comes to getting something good into the code. The quality of the code needs to be good. The feature needs to be robust. And people are going to be pretty ruthless about making sure that something that is not good quality code, something that is not robust, is not going to make its way into Postgres, because not only do we need to make sure that it's good enough to work with at the time we commit it. We need to make sure that it's maintainable. And as many studies have shown, 80% of the work that goes into any piece of code is maintenance rather than the original coding. So we really need maintainable quality code. And most of the somewhat undiplomatic speech tends to come, I think, from that very tough commitment to quality, and that's one of the things that you need to recognise. So why might you get interested in Postgres? There are a whole bunch of different reasons. People have laughed at this line. A couple of people have seen the slide demonstration. A couple of years ago, I was applying for a job, and somebody said, "Well, you spend a lot of your time, your own time, contributing to Postgres. Why do you do it?" And I said to him, "Well, I do it for good karma." And he looked, because he was a Wall Street type, he looked totally confused by that and didn't get the idea that somebody could do something for motivations other than monetary. But really, you can view it as a contribution to the worldwide community. You can view it as a contribution to poor people who can't afford to pay the Oracle tax and the Microsoft tax. It's something that's good to do in itself, and there are plenty of other good reasons for contributing to Postgres as well. It doesn't really matter why, but you do need, again, to recognise that different people are motivated by different things. Many people are motivated by interest. Some people do things because they're employed to do it. Those are going to be the people who are in the need a feature mode. Whether they're working for Enterprise DB, where Enterprise DB might need a feature, or you're working for some user group that needs a feature, user company that needs a feature. And you can contribute in a great many different ways. All of these, and a bunch of other things. However, being a hacker doesn't involve all of those things. Being a hacker involves basically this. Writing code, writing documentation, and reviewing code and documentation. But right at the moment, we're in the process of pretty much in review mode, where we're not really looking at. We're hoping people will not spend their time developing new patches, but rather helping us to clear our backlog of patches. It is important to recognise that you do need to write documentation. And plenty of times we get patches sent in which don't have documentation attached. Pretty much the first comment in the review will be, where's the documentation? You're expected to develop the documentation and send it in with your contribution. So how do you get started? Well, you get started by really by immersing yourself in the community to start with. Don't start by writing some code. Start by learning, by becoming acclimatized to the community. You can do that by reading the mailing lists, by joining the IRC channel, which is a very good way, in fact, to get to know many of these people. You can get to know Jan, David, Greg, Robert, Theo turns up from time to time, and plenty of other people here, just in this room, are often on the IRC channel. So you can get to know quite a number of members of the community personally, talking to them by joining the IRC channel. It's not a bad thing to do at all. You can run a build farm member. Yes, Jan.
Which especially adds one aspect that I think you forgot on your former list. Helping people.
Yes. That's true.
Helping other users.
Yeah, that's right. And we certainly get plenty of people who come in and say, help, I've got, ident error or, socket not found or one of those errors, and we certainly help a lot of them. Come in, please, sit down. Yes, helping people is certainly a major way of helping. And even if that's all you do on in Postgres is join the IRC channel and help people, you're being very useful member of the community. Running a build farm member is a good way of contributing and getting started to learn the development process, because basically the build farm runs you right through all the things you need to build and test Postgres. Doing that on Unix is pretty easy. On Windows it's rather hard, unfortunately, but it's still possible. And read the FAQs that are on our documentation site. They have a lot of good tips about how to get started to contribute. And then you're going to want to pick an item to work on. Pick something small. My first feature was that very small one, allowing CIDR masks in PGH HBA.conf. Okay, so instead of having to put a mask that says 255.255.255. something, you can just put /32 or whatever it is you want. Okay, just that tiny little feature was my first contribution. You want to pick something that is going to be probably about that size, or something that's a small bug fix. Make it so that the code is not going to be more than 100 lines or so. Now, I have to tell you that the Dunstan family recently broke this law in a fairly spectacular fashion. And my son made his first contribution to Postgres, which was the enum feature that we've just incorporated in 8.3, and the patch ran to something over 3,000 lines. Don't follow this example. On the to-do list, firstly, items on the to-do list we're not absolutely committed to. That's the first thing to recognise. But there's a good chance we're going to want to do them. There are a bunch of items on there which are marked as being suitable for beginners. If you're looking for something to do, rather than wanting to work on a particular feature, pick one of those. And then, once you've done that, you're interested in continuing, just build up slowly. The things that are hardest are the things that are deep down inside the engine, right? Things like concurrency, the planning, the execution, the storage manager. These things are the things that most concern databases, and of course that's because they're the hardest things to do. They're the things where you can most easily get things wrong. So even if you go on to bigger things, you're probably going to want to pick things that are at a bit higher level, probably at the language level. You might want to implement a language feature or something like that, rather than get right deep down into the guts of the thing. You probably want to wait a year or so into your experience with Postgres before you get heavily into the guts of the system.
Yeah, these central problems that lie right there in the heart of the back end have the tendency to have the most side effects.
Right.
And you've got to have a really, really good overview of the entire back end and its components and all the things that mesh together before you can work on these central features.
Right. So, yeah, don't jump in at the deep end. Work up to it. If you're working on something trivial, then you can just write a patch and send it in. But be prepared to throw it away. If it's anything that you're going to feel, disappointed, if it's totally rejected, don't start this way. Instead, what you need to do is get buy-in. Right? You need, if it's a feature, you need to make sure that the community's actually agreed that it's a feature they want. You need to have a design, again, which is agreed by the community. So in effect, you need to say, I want to do this, and I want to do it in this way. You have a high-level description. Not a code-level description, but a high-level description that says, I'm going to order these structures, I'm going to add something to this table, and so on. And get buy-in at that level. Once you do that, then you've got a much higher chance that your patch, when it comes in, is going to be acceptable. Oh, hello. Hello. Yeah. Wait.
Do you think the projector is overheated or something?
Can you turn it off and on again? It should. No, I just removed it.
Thanks. Okay, so get your design agreed, get buy-in, and you've got a much better chance of getting your patch approved without a great deal of pain. Okay, many features are things we don't want. We get people regularly come along that want to multi-thread the back end in ways that we. Yes, I know you do. Yes, and I do too, but in the ways that you want to do, right? But but there are good reasons for not doing it in a completely not in the way, for instance, that MySQL does. For instance, we don't want to have things threaded across connections because that is actually going to have a stability effect on Postgres. Now there may well be good reasons for multi-threading individual connections, which is what Jan and I have previously talked about. So sometimes the things that people want to do aren't things that we think belong in core. They should be add-on modules that we should put on PG Foundry or something like that. Sometimes people come along with features which are not standards compliant. That tends not to be terribly popular either. And lastly, if something is going to prevent us from implementing some more complete feature in the future, that will often be a reason for us not to accept a particular feature.
I think one of the confusions and reasons it's so difficult to join in is nobody understands what we and us is. We keep using the term we and us, and when you contribute something, you become part of us or we, but we decide, right? I mean, there's things that we don't want. Well, if people are contributing the features, they want them. So who is we? And I think if you understand that when you go in, you have a lot better respect for when it's declined.
Well, the we is amorphous, unfortunately. I mean, we almost never have a vote. It's largely, I mean, if there's a serious disagreement, shall we say, among senior developers, then there will occasionally be a vote. But I think we might
Did it
have
ever happen?
one or two in the last year, maybe.
It's usually the developer that's responsible for that domain of the code, correct? And that's the we. It's that one person plus some peripheral input from others.
There is no real assignment of responsibility for code. It is rather the people who are known to have the most expertise in the code.
Right,
Are the ones who voice their opinion, and if there is serious objections to something, it's not going to pass. Yeah, you have to get the buy-in of those people with the expertise in that area of the code, and then usually it's done.
But I mean, there are certainly cases where even the expert can occasionally be overridden or persuaded.
Oh, sure.
And it's happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to you, and I've seen it happen to Tom Lane.
I had things that I proposed shut down.
Yeah. So.
I just think understanding who you're being judged by
Right.
allows you to deal with that judgment a lot better. It's not like
instead of being blindsided by
Well,
light.
exactly, so that your expectation is set. It's not about being shot down.
Right.
You already said that people are very frank, forthright,
Yes.
but understanding who that's going to come from beforehand allows you to brace for impact a little bit better. So
Okay.
it's not like you submit it and you're like, Tom Lane's going to shoot it down, and then suddenly Jan speaks up and it's like, yep, that's the word. And you're like, I didn't know I was supposed to be impressing him.
That's the point that Andrew made earlier. Read the lists for a while, look at the community at large. Who are the people who are very vocal, and who are the people who have the real expertise? Might not be the same people. Yeah?
And to be honest, there are people who are, there are 2 or 3 people on the list who tend to make noise that I tend just not to take a lot of notice of. Not very many, but a couple.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true of everybody, and they're probably not the same people for everybody. But yeah, I take your point there. I think that's a very good point. Okay, so this is the other thing is this: ask lots of questions. Right? The more questions you ask, say, should I do it this way? Here are some different ways I've thought of doing it. Which one might be better? That's always a very good question to ask, and you'll usually get some very useful hints out of that. And sometimes you might need to do several iterations of it. You'll do some design, you'll come up with something, and people say, "Oh, now we look at it, that doesn't work so well. Maybe we need to do this." Now that can be very frustrating, but that is just that's going to be a part of the development process in any development process you're going to be in that's worth its salt, whether it's open source or a commercial development. You need to be prepared to do it in an iterative fashion.
And adding to that, be prepared that out of that discussion, what you actually intended to do turns into something completely different.
Yes.
I have a very nice example that everybody probably knows about, the Toast project.
Yeah.
It was originally intended as a new data type.
Right.
And look what it turned out to be. And it wasn't my idea to turn it into what it is. Yeah, so be a little open to the input, and even if it sounds completely out of the scope at the moment where it is suggested, it can be of value.
And sometimes we simply find that there are things that there are problems that occurred as we go through testing things that we didn't have any notion would happen. Let me give you a concrete example that comes from the last development cycle. We implemented this feature. It wasn't originally from me, although I did a lot of work on it, called CSV logs, which basically will create log files that are machine readable, which is a lot of people find a very useful feature. One of the things that we found was that we couldn't reasonably do it without solving a long-standing problem we had that under certain circumstances, log files could become corrupted from several different threads writing to the log file at the same time. We actually had to solve that problem. So we had to go and, before we could even look at doing CSV logs, we actually had to invent a whole new internal feature for properly serializing writing to the log files from different backends, so that they weren't overwriting each other before we could even do machine readable logs at all. So sometimes you're just going to find that problems crop up that you have no idea about. And that's just the way that development works. Okay, as we said, the community can be very tough. You need to be prepared for frank criticism. Here's one thing I can promise you. It is not personal. Right? And I have to remind myself of this from time to time. Right? And probably, occasionally somebody or other is a little bit rude to me, and probably, I'm quite certain I'm rude to people from time to time. It just happens. But it's not personal. If you invest a lot of emotion in your patch, and you're going to get very offended if people are frank about it, then you're probably in for a bit of pain. So don't do that. The community is very open-minded, and people from time to time talk about Tom Lane, who, as everybody knows, is our sort of Uber hacker. He's probably the best coder I've ever worked with. He's a very bright guy. He's also a guy with very strong opinions. He can be persuaded, despite, and some people say, oh, whenever I submit something, Tom rejects it. Tom, trust me, Tom can be persuaded. I've had plenty of things rejected by Tom, and rightly so. But let me give you a case in point. Dollar quoting. When we first suggested ways of getting around dollar quoting, Tom was against pretty well all the possible suggestions. I persevered and said, look, we have to fix this. We can't go on with these huge long strings of quotes. We've got to fix it. And eventually Tom, in fact, came up with the answer that we eventually adopted, and came up with a large part of the implementation. So Tom can be persuaded. Pretty well everybody can be persuaded.
He is reasonable.
He is reasonable, yes.
You just gotta have good reason.
You gotta have a damn good case sometimes, yes. Oops. Yeah. So sometimes you do need to persevere, and it's a judgment call about when you're, when you need to let something drop and when you don't. But sometimes you do need to persevere a bit in getting something accepted. Getting back to the quality thing, if you submit a patch that is a very high quality code, you're going to have a good chance of getting it accepted. If you do something clever, we love clever things, but we love to have them explained. If there's anything send in that's not really obvious about what it's doing, then explain it. That's really important in the code. When you're reading through thousands and thousands of lines of code, let me give you a classic example. The commands copy.c code is immensely complex and fragile. Everything in there has to be explained. You need to, because it's this massive state machine, in effect. So if you do something clever, make sure you explain it. That's really all I have to say about the culture. I'm just going to talk a little bit about tools in the few minutes I've got left. As you probably all know, we use CVS. We don't use it for any reason other than history. If we were creating the project today, we probably wouldn't use CVS. But we do. It's not that hard to use, and it actually doesn't get in our way all that much. If you don't like using it, then there are people starting to create mirrors. I think there's one for Subversion, there's one for Git. I think there's one for Mercurial somewhere around, and I'm not sure about anything else. So you can use pretty much whatever source code control system you like. You can actually also use the build farm client for development and testing. It has an option called from source, which lets you point it at a directory, which doesn't have to be CVS clean. And I've used that quite usefully in the past. The good thing about the build farm client is that it runs all the regression tests and so on for you. You can set up your config in a file so you don't have to remember it every time. It could be quite useful. It was put in. I put it in there for debugging the build farm, but I found it useful for other things. So often happens with features.
Andrew.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is on topic or not. But how does the regression suite get built out? What's the process of getting stuff into regression? Because you said you can run regressions against.
The regression tests are part of the Postgres source.
Yeah, I know that. But how do they get added to? What's the process for putting more tests in there?
It's the same as adding a feature. It's you send in a patch and it's a patch to the code.
Okay, because I've gone through some iterations on patches, and what we do internally is if you submit a patch, not only do you have to submit the patch, but you have to submit a whole suite of regressions that cover just about every corner case that you can think of.
Right.
So what happens is, as your patch gets committed, we also commit, and this is for internal development in our organization,
Yeah.
you have to commit the regression suites as well. And our regression suites have gone like this, and
Right.
I'm not checking the Postgres ones, I was just wondering, and it always stuck in my mind. How does...
Well, when you submit a new feature, in fact, as well as documentation, you should normally submit a regression test and results with it.
Okay.
And yeah,
How complete is the test coverage?
it's not as good as it could be. We have to make a judgment between testing, getting reasonable testing of features and running the regression suite in a reasonable amount of time. Probably EDB's regression suite is going to run a lot longer than we would expect the core regression suite to run.
How long does it take to run?
Build farm runs the regression suite in about 2 or 3 minutes, I think. Depending on your platform, of course.
Yeah, I actually do things a little longer.
On the iPhone?
We have a few Postgres.
Did you say 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah.
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 Okay, so it's like a pretty light test.
It's not a very heavy test, no.
What you do is just run it back to back all night.
Is there a task suite other than regression tests?
No, there's not. Now that's been discussed in the past. There's actually, about whether we should have an extra, rather heavier regression suite, and if people have contributions to make there, if you want to develop a heavier regression suite, we have a couple of tests that are in the regression suite that we don't actually run normally because they take an hour or so to run. There's precedent for that, and there's probably a very good case for having a much heavier regression suite, which we could occasionally run. And I think we'll probably get plenty of consensus about that. So if you're interested in contributing regression tests, then by all means speak up on the list. I think you'll get plenty of support.
I'm curious, not to push too far on this, but
Yeah.
you're saying regression, which for me is you change something that breaks something that used to be not broken. What about just validating that things aren't broken to begin with, like, say, date and time?
Yeah, all right. It's probably regression is a term that's being used loosely here. It's more feature tests.
Okay, every time it's run after the first time, it's a regression test, right?
Yeah,
sure. That's why the term changed.
Yeah.
But there might be something you haven't tested.
Sure.
Oh, there's plenty
We don't-
that aren't
we don't
testing
create-
at all right now.
We don't create a regression test for every bug we fix.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, the suite would just get very large and take a long time to run. Okay, when you're configuring for development, you always want to turn on dependencies, turn on debugging, and turn on CSS. And personally, I always use a non-standard port so that even if I've got Postgres running on my development machine on the normal port, it doesn't conflict. I never ever have any port conflicts. In fact, what I do, I'll come to that in a minute, I actually have a script which picks a new port every time I set up a development tree. Okay, now, debugging is actually difficult, unfortunately. You can use trace rights using elog. Okay, you can drive a debugger, and normally what driving a debugger involves is you'll have to start up the server, start up PSQL to get your back-end connection, and then attach your debugger to the back-end connection, and then start sending SQL commands through the front end. You can use, personally I detest GDB, particularly in its native fashion, and I prefer to use DDD. Other people use Emacs as a front end, or I think there are a couple of other exotic front ends. Windows debugging is particularly difficult, and I've never managed to get a debugger working happily on Windows. Perhaps Magnus can tell us how. I don't know how. There are some built-in traces you can use. You can use set log bin messages to one of the debug levels to get various levels of output. Humongous. You can set these options on to get plans and parsers printed on the log. They can be useful depending on what you're doing. Okay. Always run the regression test though. If you send in a patch and it breaks the regression suite, your patch is likely to get very short shrift. So make sure that after you've done your make, you run make check. That's all you have to do. If it's a new feature, particularly, you'll need to send in a new test or to add to existing tests. testing performance can also be difficult. PG Bench, we've heard about a bit from Robert this morning. There's also /timing in PSQL. Login duration statement can be quite useful to see how long certain SQL commands take. Make sure that if you're doing tests, you run long runs. There's always quite a deal of variation, particularly anything that's going to load up the buffer cache. The first time it's going to take an awful lot longer than the next time. And profiling is also hard. OProfile is actually pretty good if you're developing on Linux. Dtrace is very cool, as showed us, and that can be used quite usefully for profiling. Unfortunately, it's only available on Solaris and OS X now, and I'm not sure what the status of FreeBSD is. Do you know?
FreeBSD is available in user land. The kernel parts aren't built yet.
Right.
It's in progress. But you do what the rest of developers, at least in other open source projects, are whatever OS you're running, you have a VMware instance to run Linux for Valgrind, Solaris for Dtrace, and you use which one you need at the moment.
Isn't that dreadful?
Yes. Lose loyalty, it's not important.
Yeah. Okay, quite often you want to be able to find symbols in the code. You can use recursive grep, you can use C tags and E tags, and there's also a regular analysis of the Postgres source done using deoxygen. And you can go and look for your symbols there and find out where they're defined and used, which is very useful. Okay, what about backpatching? Well, the good news is you never need to, pretty much. If something needs to be backpatched, then that's something that that the committers will normally undertake to do for you. As you probably know, we pretty much never backpatch a new feature. We only backpatch bug fixes. That's actually really important because it's one of the major reasons for the stability of Postgres. No matter how safe we tend to feel about things, we want not to bring new things back into the stable branches because the law of unintended consequences can always get up and bite us. So we don't do it. If you make catalogue changes, though, there will need to be a bump in the catalogue version. That's so that any old versions that rely on that rely on previous versions of the catalogue will no longer run, rather than cause you massive surprise when they do. So again, that's normally handled by a committer, and it forces you to run in an NDB.
Can you say a little more about that? I don't really know what this
Okay, let's say we add a field to a catalogue table. Now, somebody who hasn't got your change.
And the catalog table, that's where I need to start. I'm not sure what a catalog table is.
Okay, the catalogue table.
If this is
the catalogue tables are the system tables. For instance, they define, all right, PG class defines the list of tables that are in a database. So PG class is itself a table.
A system table.
And it's a system table. Now let's say we add a field to that. Now code that hasn't picked up that new version of PG class might actually go and consult PG class and get back something that it doesn't expect, because it doesn't know about this new field, and do all sorts of horrible things, basically mangle your repository. So what we do is we insist that the version of Postgres that you're running match exactly the catalog version of the repository, which is set up by an FDB.
Okay.
So when there's a change in the catalogs, what we do is we change the catalog version, which is going to invalidate anything that hasn't picked up that change and hasn't been DB'd with that catalog version. That's a protection for developers. Occasionally, you do get things that I'm running out of time. That some of the occasional gotchas, you'll get a bad R-path. I saw somebody the other day who linked against a bad library. They had a library mismatch. That sometimes can bite you, and occasionally you need to make sure that you run make clean or make this clean, or even maintain a clean in your repository, and then rebuild your whole set because something or other has changed that you haven't picked up properly. Don't forget these useful and important things. Message style guidelines. There's a bunch of guidelines that say that the messages that you print out from log messages and so on have to meet certain characteristics. They must be grammatical in certain ways, and you use shall in some cases and will in other cases, and the grammar police will come and do horrible things to you if you get them wrong. That's all in the documentation. Okay, what do? I keep a forest of trees checked out, one for each stable branch and one for head. Okay, but that's because I'm a committer. Normally you'll only need to keep head checked out because that's where all your development is going to happen unless you're fixing a bug. Okay, for every development what I do is I actually copy that tree to somewhere else so that I never actually do work directly in the checked out tree. I just do a copy with the -a flag, which is basically keeps all of its file system characteristics, and does a recursive copy. And then I have a script called PGConf which sets up my entire development environment. Once I've done that, I can start editing code. And basically, it makes sure that I use depend, it picks a port for me, and all that sort of stuff. Then when I'm done with that particular development, I just I run a commit, blow that directory away, and I'm ready to start the next thing. That's it.
Yeah. Just to kind of understand a little bit, how do we get hot cake together? Just as a typical example
Hot.
of a feature. Like when did it start? When did it end? Just to get a sense.
Hot ran most of the 8.3 cycle, and in fact was the thing that held us up for the most part in finishing up 8.3, because it went through quite a lot of iterations.
I heard about 15. So.
It was a very difficult thing to get in.
It was one of those not for beginners.
Oh, yes.
For timelines for people who want stuff in. So think in terms of a year and a half or something like that?
I think Jeff Davis has the longest history. He 2.5 years on the synchronized scan patch. That's how we did that patch in. So that was the longest patch ever.
The development cycle for Postgres, the idea is to release one major version per year. Is that correct? That's what I've read. Maybe it was wrong.
That's not what we've done for the past few.
But the cycle has been taking longer than we've planned to.
So
yes, I think that's basically right.
Generally, how long of that cycle are you adding new features, and then how long are you, after you're done accepting new features, are you working on finalizing?
Part of the idea of these commit fests, Jan probably speaks this better than I can, but part of the idea of that is so that we don't actually have this long period of patch acceptance after feature freeze on the release. So the idea is that we will actually only have one short commit fest after feature freeze running roughly, possibly a few weeks instead of 3 months or 3 or 4 months like it did this last release. And then we'll go in. So within, say, a month of feature freeze, we would have a beta. I think that would be the idea. Is that right?
I think the release cycle really is a never-ending story.
Yeah.
We always want to have short feature freeze, beta cycle, release candidates, release, and it never really happens because the one thing you can be sure of is if it ain't ready, it's not going to be released, period. Yeah, we release when it's ready, not when we said it might be available. Yeah, that is actually one of the big advantages that an open source project that is not in any way profit oriented has. Somebody might be hurt because he expected a release to be available with a new feature. But if it isn't ready for prime time, it's not going to be released, and that's it. We will not sacrifice quality for timeline.
Yeah.
How are releases for ancillary projects, Windows installer, PG admin? Like, what determines when a release is made? There's no core changes, there's just design.
That's under the control of their particular administrators.
Postgres goes with sort of like the Linux kernel model, where it has its release cycle, and things that are around it are sort of, in some sense, independent.
Okay.
So, if the installer needs to really do something different because it has been a new release, then they try to sync that up.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we better finish there. Thanks very much.
Apparently there was a printing error on the schedule, so I think we're going to reconvene at like 1:15, and then the next talk will have to